My parents sold my apartment behind my back to pay for my sister's $120,000 wedding. They called me laughing, saying thanks for the wedding present. I smiled and told them to check their own mail. Their faces turned ghostly white when they saw the foreclosure notice I had sent, and realized that I was the one secretly paying for their entire life. Before I tell you how I turned their dream wedding into a nightmare they will never forget, let me know where you are watching from in the comments. Hit that like button and subscribe if you have ever had to remind your family exactly who holds the purse strings. My name is Zora, and I am 32 years old. I work as a forensic accountant in Atlanta, which means I spend my days tracking down hidden assets and exposing financial fraud. I am good at finding secrets. I just never thought the biggest fraud I would ever uncover would be my own father. It was a Tuesday evening when my life as I knew it ceased to exist. I had just landed at Hartsfield-Jackson International Airport after a grueling 3-week audit in London. My body was running on caffeine and sheer willpower. All I wanted was to get back to my condo in Buckhead, take a long hot bath, and sleep for 12 hours. My apartment was my sanctuary. It was a sleek 2-bedroom unit with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city skyline. I had bought it 5 years ago, or at least I thought I had. The taxi dropped me off, and the familiar sight of the building gave me a sense of relief. The doorman Marcus gave me a strange look as I walked in, dragging my Rimowa suitcase. He opened his mouth as if to say something, but then closed it and just tipped his hat. I was too tired to ask what was wrong. I got into the elevator and pressed the button for the 18th floor. When I reached my door, I dropped my bag and fished for my keycard. I tapped it against the digital lock, expecting the familiar beep and the mechanical whir of the deadbolt sliding back. Instead, the light flashed red. I frowned and tapped it again. Red again. I tried entering the manual code. Access denied. A surge of irritation prickled my skin. I figured the battery in the lock must have died while I was away. I was about to call maintenance when I heard a noise from inside. It sounded like a sledgehammer hitting drywall. Panic spiked in my chest. My first thought was that someone had broken in. I pounded on the door with my fist. "Hello, is someone in there? Open up!" The banging inside stopped. A moment later, the door swung open. Standing there was a man I had never seen before. He was tall, white, wearing a tailored suit that cost more than my first car, but covered in a fine layer of white dust. Behind him, I could see past the foyer. My jaw dropped. My living room was gone. My custom Italian leather sofa, my vintage coffee table, my bookshelves filled with first editions, all gone. In their place were drop cloths, ladders, and 3 workers tearing down the partition wall I loved. "Who are you?" I demanded, stepping forward. "What are you doing in my apartment?" The man looked at me with confusion that quickly hardened into annoyance. "Excuse me, miss. I think you have the wrong unit." I stepped past him, my heart hammering against my ribs. "No, I do not have the wrong unit. I have lived here for 5 years. Where are my things?" I pulled out my phone, ready to dial 911. The man held up a hand. "Ma'am, please calm down. I purchased this property last week. We are doing renovations before my wife moves in." Purchased. The word hung in the air like toxic smoke. "That is impossible. This is my apartment. I pay the mortgage. I pay the HOA fees. It is not for sale." The man sighed and walked over to a briefcase resting on a sawhorse. He pulled out a thick stack of documents and handed them to me. "Look, I do not know who you are, but I have the title right here. Everything is legal." I snatched the papers from his hand. My eyes scanned the lines frantically, looking for a mistake, a clerical error, anything. Then I saw it. The quitclaim deed. It transferred the property from the previous owner to this man's holding company. And there at the bottom was the signature of the grantor. Desmond Banks. My father. The room started to spin. I grabbed the doorframe to keep from falling. "This cannot be right," I whispered. "My father does not own this place." "I do." Technically, that was the lie I had told myself for 5 years. When I was 27, my parents had gotten into deep financial trouble. My father, Desmond, had gambled away their savings and was about to lose this condo, which he had bought as an investment property years prior. I stepped in. I paid off the arrears, cleared the liens, and took over the mortgage payments. I effectively bought the place from them. But my mother, Viola, had begged me not to transfer the title yet. She said it would ruin your father's credit score, Zora. He needs this asset on his books for just a few more years. Please, baby girl, just trust us. I was young, I was making good money, and I was stupid enough to trust my parents. So I let the deed stay in Desmond's name, even though every single dime that paid for it came from my bank account. I had a notarized agreement stating I was the beneficial owner, but I had never recorded it with the county. I looked up at the man in the suit. My stomach churned with bile. Where are my belongings? Everything I own was in here. The man shrugged. The seller said the unit would be delivered empty. He hired a clearance crew to haul everything away 2 days ago. He said it was all junk left by a tenant who skipped town. Junk. My grandmother's antique vanity, my diplomas, my entire life. Junk. Get out, the man said, his patience gone, or I will call the police. I did not move. I was frozen in shock. He did not wait. He pulled out his phone and made a call. 5 minutes later, 2 building security guards appeared. One of them was Marcus, the doorman who had looked at me so strangely earlier. He looked down at his shoes, unable to meet my eyes. Miss Banks. Marcus mumbled. I am so sorry. You have to go. The new owner wants you off the premises. This isn't real, I said, my voice trembling. Marcus, you know me. You know this is my home. Marcus shook his head sadly. Mr. Banks called the management office last week, Zora. He told them you were evicted. He showed them the sale papers. There is nothing I can do. The other guard was less sympathetic. He grabbed the handle of my suitcase and wheeled it into the hallway. Let's go, ma'am. Do not make a scene. I was escorted out of my own building like a criminal. They walked me through the lobby past the neighbors I had exchanged pleasantries with for years, who now whispered behind their hands. They led me out the front revolving doors and deposited me on the sidewalk of Peachtree Road. As if on cue, the sky opened up. A torrential Atlanta summer downpour soaked me to the bone in seconds. My hair was plastered to my face. My expensive suit was ruined. I stood there shivering, staring up at the building that was no longer mine. I felt like a fool. A naive, trusting fool. I had built my entire career on catching liars and thieves. I could spot a shell company from a mile away. I could trace laundered money through 3 different continents. But I had failed to see the thieves sitting at my own dinner table. My phone buzzed in my pocket. I pulled it out, wiping the rain from the screen. It was a text notification from my bank. A large withdrawal had just been made from a joint emergency fund I shared with my mother. A fund I had set up for their medical expenses, balance 0. I stared at the screen, the rain mixed with the hot tears suddenly streaming down my face. They took the apartment. They took my furniture. And now they took the cash. I was homeless, standing in the rain with nothing but a suitcase and a phone. But as the shock began to fade, a cold, hard rage took its place. It started in my gut and spread through my veins, warming me against the chill rain. They thought I was just the quiet, dutiful daughter, the one who paid the bills and fixed the mistakes, the one who worked in the background while my sister Tiana sparkled in the spotlight. They thought they could strip me bare, and I would just take it because I was family. They were wrong. I wiped my face. I did not call a friend to cry. I did not call a hotel. I opened my contacts and scrolled past my mother's name. I dialed the number for Arthur Brooks, the most ruthless real estate attorney in the city. He answered on the second ring. Zora, he said, surprised. I thought you were in London. I am back, I said, my voice steady and cold as ice, and I need to sue my parents. I dragged my suitcase to the curb and hailed a taxi. I was not going to a hotel. Not yet. I had one stop to make first. The driver looked at me in the rearview mirror, concerned by my soaked appearance. Where to, miss? I gave him the address of my parents' large colonial house in Cascade Heights. The house that I knew for a fact was currently 3 months behind on its mortgage. A mortgage that I had secretly purchased from the bank 6 months ago through a shell company to keep them from being foreclosed on. They did not know that yet. They thought they had just pulled off the heist of the century, selling my apartment to fund my sister's wedding. They thought they were brilliant. They had no idea they had just declared war on the one person who held the deed to their entire existence. I leaned back in the taxi seat and watched the rain streak against the window. Let them have their champagne tonight. Let them toast to their cleverness, because tomorrow morning, the hangover is going to be brutal. The taxi smelled of stale pine air freshener and damp upholstery, but it felt like a war room. I dialed my mother's number, my thumb hovering over the screen for a second before pressing call. It rang 4 times. I knew she was looking at the screen, seeing my name, and debating whether I was worth the interruption. Finally, the line connected. The sound of clinking glasses and high-pitched laughter assaulted my ear. Zora, baby. You will not believe it. Tiana just tried on the most exquisite Vera Wang. It is mermaid cut with hand-stitched lace. She looks like a princess. A literal princess. My mother's voice was bubbly, effervescent, completely detached from the reality that she had just made her eldest daughter homeless. I gripped the phone tighter, my knuckles turning white. Mother, I said, my voice low and dangerous. I'm not calling about a dress. I am at my apartment. Or rather, what used to be my apartment. Why is there a strange man tearing down my walls? The laughter on the other end didn't stop, but the background noise muffled slightly, as if she had stepped away from the party. Oh, that. You found out already. We were going to tell you at dinner on Sunday. Desmond didn't want to worry you while you were overseas working so hard. Worry me? I choked out a laugh that sounded more like a bark. You sold my home. You forged Dad's signature, or you made him sign it, I don't care which. You evicted me. How could you possibly think that wouldn't worry me? Now stop right there. Zora. Viola snapped, her tone shifting from party hostess to stern matriarch in a nanosecond. Watch your tone. Nobody forged anything. That condo was in your father's name. It has been for 5 years. It was his property to sell. Because you begged me to leave it in his name, I shouted, startling the taxi driver. To fix his credit score after the bankruptcy. I paid every cent of that mortgage. I paid the down payment. I paid the taxes. That equity was mine. That was my money. And we are very grateful for your help over the years. Zora, really we are, she said dismissively, as if I had simply loaned her $20 for lunch. But look at the bigger picture. Tiana is marrying a Sterling. Brad's family owns half of Savannah. We cannot have a backyard barbecue for a wedding like this. We need a venue. We need catering. We need flowers that don't look like they came from a grocery store. Do you know how much a wedding like this costs? I don't care, I said. $120,000, she announced proudly. And that is just the estimate. We needed cash, Zora. Liquid cash. And there was that apartment just sitting there accruing value. It was the only way to give your sister the day she deserves. You are the big sister. You have a good job. You can always buy another place. Tiana only gets married once. You liquidated my net worth for a party. I said, the realization settling over me like a shroud. You stole $300,000 of equity for one day. It is an investment in the family's future, she corrected me. When Tiana marries Brad, we all move up. You should be happy for her. Instead, you are calling me acting selfish and petty. Honestly, Zora, sometimes I wonder where you get this stingy spirit from. It certainly isn't from me. Selfish, I whispered. I paid off Dad's gambling debts. I paid for Tiana's car. I paid for your dental implants. That is what family does, she hissed. We help each other. And right now, helping the family means ensuring Tiana doesn't look like a pauper in front of the Sterlings. Now listen, I have to go. The consultant is bringing out the veil, and I'm not going to let your bad attitude ruin Tiana's mood. We will see you at the engagement party on Saturday. Do not come unless you have fixed your face and your attitude. The line went dead. I lowered the phone, staring at the black screen. The audacity was breathless. They truly believed they were entitled to my labor, my money, and my life. To them, I wasn't a daughter. I was an ATM with a pulse. I opened my banking app again. I needed to see the damage in black and white. I scrolled past the zero balance in the joint emergency fund. I looked at the transaction history. The transfer hadn't gone to a wedding planner. It hadn't gone to a florist. The $50,000 from our joint account money I had saved for their health issues had been transferred to a personal account labeled Tiana Banks. They hadn't just paid for a wedding, they had given my sister a blank check to play rich girl. The taxi driver cleared his throat, his eyes watching me in the rearview mirror. "We are here, miss. That will be $42. I looked out the window. We were parked in front of the sprawling colonial house in Cascade Heights. My parents' house. The lawn was manicured to perfection. The Mercedes in the driveway was polished to a shine. To the outside world, they were the pillars of the community. Successful, pious, wealthy. But I knew the truth. I knew about the second mortgage. I knew about the maxed-out credit cards hidden in shoeboxes. I knew that without my monthly contributions, the lights in this big, beautiful house would have been cut off months ago. I paid the driver and stepped out onto the wet pavement. The rain had slowed to a drizzle, but the air was thick and humid. I looked up at the house. I could see lights on in the living room. They weren't at the bridal shop anymore. They were home, probably celebrating their windfall. I wasn't going to knock. I wasn't going to cry. I was going to walk in there and look them in the eye. I had a secret of my own. A secret that was sitting in a safe deposit box across town. A document that proved I didn't just pay their bills, I owned their debt. And if they wanted to talk about family investments, I was about to give them a lesson in return on investment they would never forget. I smoothed my wet hair, straightened my ruined blazer, and walked up the driveway. The game had changed. They thought they were playing checkers with a child. They didn't realize they were playing chess with a grandmaster. And I was about to take their queen. I did not knock. I still had my key, the heavy brass one that opened the front door of the colonial house in Cascade Heights that I had saved from foreclosure 3 times in the last decade. I slid it into the lock and turned. The mechanism clicked smoothly, a stark contrast to the angry red flashing light of my own apartment just hours before. I pushed the door open and stepped into the foyer, leaving my ruined Rimowa suitcase on the wet porch. The air inside was warm and thick with the scent of expensive lilies and expensive perfume. Soft jazz was playing from the surround sound system I had bought them for Christmas 2 years ago. Laughter floated from the formal living room, the kind of carefree, joyous sound that belonged to people who hadn't just committed grand larceny against their own flesh and blood. I walked past the antique console table, piled high with silver-wrapped gifts. Engagement presents. I caught a glimpse of myself in the hallway mirror. My hair was frizzy from the rain, my mascara was smudged, and my designer blazer was ruined. I looked like a woman who had just lost everything. Which I supposed I was. I rounded the corner into the living room, and the laughter died instantly. It was a tableau of extravagance. My mother Viola was sitting on the velvet chaise lounge holding a crystal flute of champagne. My father Desmond was standing by the fireplace lighting a cigar, a brand I knew cost $50 a pop. And in the center of the room, standing on a small podium they must have dragged in from the sewing room, was Tiana. She wasn't wearing the dress yet, but she was draped in white silk, a sample veil pinned to her perfectly coiffed hair. She looked radiant. She looked expensive. She looked at me standing there dripping rainwater onto the Persian rug, and her lip curled in disgust. "Zora," Tiana said, her voice dripping with artificial sweetness. "You are soaking wet. You are ruining the aesthetic. We are trying to take photos for the wedding website." My mother gasped, setting her drink down on a coaster. "Zora, look at the floor. You are tracking mud everywhere. Honestly, could you not have cleaned up before coming over?" We have company coming in an hour. I didn't move. I didn't apologize. I just stared at them. My gaze sweeping from the champagne to the cigar to the silk. It was obscene. It was a celebration funded by my eviction. I want my money, I said. My voice was quiet, but it cut through the jazz music like a serrated knife. Desmond sighed, blowing a cloud of smoke toward the ceiling. He didn't even look at me. He just inspected the ash of his cigar. Here we go. I told you, Viola. She is going to make this about her. She always does. About me, I stepped further into the room, my wet shoes squelching on the hardwood. You sold my home, Dad. You forged my signature on a quitclaim deed. You left me with nothing but a suitcase. I am homeless because you wanted to buy champagne. Technically, Desmond said, turning to face me with the practiced arrogance of a man who believes his own lies, the apartment was in my name. I exercised my legal right as the property owner to liquidate an asset. It was a business decision, Zora. Nothing personal. A business decision. I laughed, a harsh, broken sound. I paid the mortgage for 5 years. I paid the down payment. I have the bank transfer records. I have the emails where you begged me to keep it in your name to help your credit score so you could get a loan for this house. This house that I am also paying for, by the way. We are family, Zora Viola interjected, standing up and smoothing her skirt. We do not keep score. Your sister needed this. Brad Sterling comes from old money, honey. Real money. His family founded half the banks in Savannah. Do you know what it would look like if Tiana didn't bring a substantial dowry to this marriage? If we couldn't host a wedding that matches their standards, it would be humiliating. We are investing in her future. And by extension, the family's future. So I am the sacrifice, I asked, looking at Tiana. She was sipping her champagne, watching me with a bored expression. You are the big sister, Tiana said, shrugging. You have a career, Zora. You are a forensic accountant or whatever. You make good money. You can just buy another apartment. Why are you trying to ruin my moment? You always do this. You are just jealous because I am getting the fairy tale and you are… well, you are you. The cruelty was casual, effortless. It took my breath away. She didn't see a person. She saw a resource to be mined. I am not jealous, Tiana, I said, feeling a cold calm settle over me. I am the victim of a crime. And I am here to tell you that if you do not return the funds, the $300,000 from the sale, and the $50,000 you stole from the joint account by tomorrow morning, I am going to the police. The room went dead silent. The jazz music seemed to get louder. Desmond's face darkened. He took a step toward me, his size imposing, his eyes flashing with a familiar volatility. You will do no such thing. You will not drag this family's name through the mud, Zora. You will not embarrass us in front of the Sterlings, and you certainly will not embarrass us in front of the church. The church. The ultimate weapon. My parents were deacons, pillars of the community. Their reputation was their currency. I will tell everyone, Desmond thundered, pointing the cigar at me like a weapon. I will tell them you are ungrateful. I will tell them you abandoned your financial obligations to your elderly parents. Who do you think they will believe? The successful, beautiful Tiana, who is marrying a Sterling, or the bitter spinster daughter who spends her life looking for trouble? He smiled, then a nasty, triumphant grin. Besides, you can't go to the police. You have no proof. The deed is legal. The account was joint. You gave me access. You trusted me. That is on you, Zora. He was right. On paper, he was right. He knew the law just enough to exploit it. He knew I had been sloppy with the paperwork because I thought blood meant loyalty. Tiana giggled, breaking the tension. Seriously, Zora, just go. You are depressing me. And fix your hair before the engagement party on Saturday. Brad's brother is coming and he is single. Maybe if you cleaned up nice, we could get you a date. Though I doubt he dates women who look like drowned rats. I looked at them. Really looked at them. My mother worried about her rug. My father puffing on a cigar bought with my sweat. My sister draped in stolen silk. They weren't just selfish, they were predators, and I had been their prey for 32 years. I realized then that screaming wouldn't work, crying wouldn't work, threats of police wouldn't work because they believed they were untouchable. They believed I was too weak to actually hurt them because I had always been the fixer, the one who cleaned up the mess. I needed to speak a language they understood. I took a deep breath, inhaling the scent of lilies and betrayal. "You are right, Dad," I said, my voice soft, almost gentle. "I shouldn't have threatened you. Family is family, right?" Desmond relaxed, his shoulders dropping. "Exactly. I knew you would see reason. Now go get cleaned up. There is a guest room upstairs you can use until you find a rental. Just don't stay too long. We need the space for the bridesmaids next week." "I won't be staying," I said, turning toward the door. "I have some errands to run. But don't worry about the engagement party. I wouldn't miss it for the world." Viola beamed, clapping her hands together. "That is the spirit. Now that is my good girl. Oh, and Zora, since you are leaving, could you pick up the catering bill for the rehearsal dinner?" The card on file was declined for some reason. "Probably a bank glitch. Just use yours and we will pay you back. We will pay you back." The lie was so reflexive, she probably didn't even realize she was saying it. They had just stolen $350,000 from me, and they were asking me to pay for sandwiches. "Sure, Mom," I said, not turning around. "Consider it handled." I walked back out into the rain. The water felt cleansing now. I didn't call a taxi immediately. Instead, I stood at the end of the driveway and looked back at the house. I took a mental picture of it. The lights in the windows, the manicured lawn, the Mercedes in the driveway. I wanted to remember it exactly as it was in this moment. Perfect, pristine, and entirely built on a foundation of sand. They thought I had given up. They thought they had won. Tiana had told me to buy her a wedding gift. I smiled, a cold, humorless expression that felt foreign on my face. Oh, I was going to give her a gift, all right. I was going to give her a gift that would burn this entire house of cards to the ground. I turned my back on the house and walked into the darkness. The time for talking was over. The time for foreclosure had begun. The elevator ride to the 42nd floor of the Sovereign building was silent enough to hear my own heart beating against my ribs. I wasn't wet anymore, having changed into a spare suit I kept in my office, but I still felt the chill of the rain and the deeper chill of my father's betrayal. I walked past the receptionist, who knew better than to ask why I was there at 8 in the evening, and went straight to the corner office. Arthur was waiting for me. He was a man who wore three-piece suits as armor and viewed emotions as inefficiencies. He didn't offer me tea or sympathy. He simply pointed to the leather chair opposite his desk and opened a file folder. We sat in silence for a moment, the city lights of Atlanta sprawling out beneath us, a glittering grid of secrets and lies. Arthur slid a piece of paper across the mahogany desk. It was the quit-claim deed, the document that had transferred ownership of my Buckhead condo to the shell company that eventually sold it. "Look at the signature," Arthur said, his voice devoid of inflection. I looked. At the bottom of the page, next to the date stamp from 3 weeks ago, was a scrawl that was supposed to be mine. It was a good attempt. He had the slant right and the sharp loop on the Z that I had adopted in college. But he had missed the pressure points. He had pressed too hard on the downstroke. It was the signature of a man who was angry, even as he was stealing. "It is a forgery," I said flatly. "It is a felony," Arthur corrected. He leaned back, steeping his fingers. "In the state of Georgia, forgery in the first degree is punishable by up to 15 years in prison. And since the value of the property exceeds $100,000, we are looking at significant sentencing guidelines. Your father didn't just sign your name, Zora. He impersonated you before a notary. That means he either bribed the notary or he found someone to pose as you. That is conspiracy. That is identity theft." I stared at the signature. I tried to feel sadness for the father who used to make me pancakes, but I couldn't find it. I only found the image of him puffing on that $50 cigar while I stood dripping on his rug. I want to file the police report, I said. Tonight. Arthur nodded slowly, but he didn't reach for the phone. We can do that. We can have him arrested by morning. The scandal would be immediate. He would lose his standing in the church. The wedding would be cancelled. Tiana would be humiliated. Good, I said. That is exactly what I want. Is it? Arthur asked, his eyes sharp. Or do you want something more permanent? I frowned. What is more permanent than prison? Total destruction, Arthur said. Listen to me, Zora. If we arrest him now, he becomes a martyr. He will cry to the congregation that he made a mistake trying to help his family and that his heartless daughter threw him in a cage. He will spin the narrative. The wedding will be cancelled due to a family tragedy, and they will save face. They will keep the narrative control. I felt my blood run cold. He was right. Desmond was a master manipulator. He would turn his handcuffs into a crown of thorns. So, what do? I asked. We let them build the castle. Arthur said, a cruel smile touching his lips. We let them spend every dime. We let them invite every important person in Atlanta. We let them walk down the aisle. We let them think they have gotten away with it. And then when they are standing at the highest point, when the fall will be the most devastating, we pull the foundation out from under them. I understood then why Arthur was the most feared attorney in the city. He didn't just want to win cases, he wanted to dismantle enemies. I reached into my bag and pulled out the other file, the one I had retrieved from my safety deposit box on the way over. I slid it across the desk to him. If we are going to wait, I said, I want to make sure the trap is inescapable. You should look at this. Arthur opened the file. He scanned the first page, then the second. His eyebrows shot up. This is the mortgage note for the Cascade Heights house, he said, looking up at me with new respect. You bought the non-performing note from the bank. 6 months ago, I confirmed. They stopped paying the mortgage a year ago. The bank was preparing to foreclose. I used a shell company to buy the debt for 60 cents on the dollar. I didn't want them to end up on the street, so I just held on to it. I was going to forgive it eventually as a surprise. Arthur laughed, a dry barking sound. You own their house, Zora. You are their lender. You don't need the police to evict them. You just need to call the loan due. And since they used the proceeds from selling my apartment to pay for a party instead of their mortgage, I said, connecting the dots, they have acted in bad faith. Exactly, Arthur said, closing the file with a snap. We have them, Zora. We have them on fraud, we have them on forgery, and we have them on default. We can take everything, but we have to be patient. We have to let them dig the hole so deep they can never climb out. I stood up, walking to the window. I looked out at the city, at the lights of the condos and homes filled with people who probably loved their children. Okay, I said, turning back to him. We wait for the wedding, but I am not going to sit idle while they spend my money. If I am the bank, Arthur, I think it is time the bank started cutting credit limits. Arthur nodded, handing me a tablet. Be my guest. I took the device and sat down. It was time to go to work. I wasn't just a forensic accountant, I was the family CFO, the chief financial officer of the bank's family, whether they knew it or not. For years I had managed everything. I had set up autopays, linked accounts, and added authorized users to build their credit scores. I logged into the utility portal first. The water bill for the Cascade Heights house was in my name because my mother had forgotten to pay it 3 times in a row back in 2019. I clicked on the account settings. I saw the usage history, a spike in the last week, probably from filling the jacuzzi tub Tiana loved so much. I moved my cursor to the service status. Cancel service. Reason, moving out. I clicked confirm. The water would be off by tomorrow morning. Next was the electricity, also in my name. I scheduled the disconnect for Friday afternoon, right in the middle of when the stylist would be coming to do Tiana's hair trial. Then I went to the credit cards. This was the big one. I had added Tiana as an authorized user on my Platinum Amex 4 years ago to help her buy books for college. She had kept the card, promising to only use it for emergencies. I pulled up the recent transaction history. The Venetian Nail Spa, $200. Saks Fifth Avenue, $1,200. The Ritz-Carlton Spa, $500. Emergencies. I didn't just remove her as a user, I reported the card lost. That would flag any attempted transaction immediately. The next time she tried to swipe it, it wouldn't just decline. The merchant would be instructed to confiscate it. I worked my way down the list. The streaming services, the country club membership dues that were auto-drafted from my checking account, the lease on the Mercedes my father drove, which I had co-signed. I contacted the leasing office and revoked my guarantee, citing financial fraud. It took me an hour. By the time I was done, I had systematically dismantled the invisible infrastructure that kept their lives running. They were like cartoon characters who had run off a cliff but hadn't looked down yet. They were floating on air suspension provided by me. And I had just cut the strings. I handed the tablet back to Arthur. "It is done." He looked at the list of cancellations and nodded. "You know they will call you. They will scream." "Let them scream," I said, picking up my bag. "I won't hear them. I am changing my number tonight. The only way they can talk to me is in person. And the next time I see them, I want it to be public." I walked out of the office and into the cool night air. I felt lighter than I had in years. I checked into the St. Regis using my corporate card. I ordered a steak and a bottle of red wine. I sat in the plush robe watching the news and waiting. I didn't have to wait long. The next morning I was drinking coffee when my old phone, which I had kept turned on just to monitor the fallout, lit up. It was a text from Tiana. "My card was declined at Sephora. I am with the bridesmaids. Zora, this is so embarrassing. Fix it now." I took a sip of coffee. The bitterness was gone. It tasted sweet. I didn't reply. I just watched the messages roll in. "Mom. Zora, why is the power off? The electrician says the account is closed. Call me Dad." "The leasing agent just called me." "What did you do?" "Zora. Answer the phone. Tiana." "Zora. I am serious. I am standing at the register. Everyone is looking at me. Pick up." I smiled and turned the phone off. Then I dropped it into the glass of water on my bedside table. I watched the bubbles rise to the surface as the screen flickered and died. They wanted a wedding. They wanted a show. Well, the show was just starting. And the first act was going to be a blackout. I finished my coffee, dressed in my sharpest suit, and headed out to meet Arthur for lunch. We had a foreclosure to plan. The Saturday of the engagement party arrived with a humidity that clung to the skin like a guilty conscience. I drove my rental car past the security gate of the Cascade Heights community, watching the iron gates swing open with a slow, majestic creak. My parents had lived here for 20 years, desperately trying to keep up with neighbors who were doctors, judges, and athletes. Today the driveway was lined with valets in white jackets, and the lawn was transformed into a scene from a magazine spread. A massive marquee tent stretched across the backyard, draped in white silk and crystals. A string quartet played Debussy near the rose bushes. Waiters circulated with trays of hors d'oeuvres that cost more than my monthly student loan payments used to be. It was beautiful. It was extravagant. It was funded entirely by the theft of my property. I checked my reflection in the rearview mirror one last time. I had chosen my outfit with the precision of a military strike. It was a floor-length black gown, structural and severe, with a neckline that plunged just enough to be dangerous. It wasn't festive. It was a statement. I looked like I was attending the funeral of their social standing. I applied a fresh coat of blood-red lipstick, took a deep breath, and stepped out of the car. The moment I walked onto the lawn, the air shifted. Conversations stalled. Heads turned. I could see the whispers rippling through the crowd like wind through wheat. "Is that Zora? She looks incredible. I thought she was in London." I glided through the guests, accepting compliments with a cool, detached smile. I spotted my mother Viola near the champagne tower. She was wearing a gold sequined dress that was trying too hard to look like old money, but screamed lottery winner. When she saw me, her smile faltered for a fraction of a second before she plastered it back on. She excused herself from a group of women in church hats and intercepted me before I could reach the bar. "Zora." She hissed through her teeth, grabbing my elbow with a grip that could crush walnuts. You actually came. And you are wearing black. Is this a joke? I pulled my arm away gently but firmly. Hello, Mother. You look expensive. I assume my apartment sale covered the sequins. Keep your voice down, Viola whispered frantically, her eyes darting around to see if anyone was listening. This is Tiana's day. Do not start with your drama. We have very important people here. The Sterlings are right over there by the fountain. If you embarrass us, Zora, I swear I will never forgive you. I looked at her. Really looked at her. She was terrified. Beneath the makeup and the jewels, she was trembling. She knew she was walking a tightrope over a canyon of debt and deceit. Relax, Mom, I said, smoothing my dress. I am just here to wish my baby sister well. Where is she? Viola narrowed her eyes, suspicious of my calm demeanor. She is inside, touching up her makeup. Just behave yourself, Zora. Eat some shrimp. Smile. And for God's sake, try not to look so much like a witch. I watched her scurry back to her guests, her laughter shrill and forced. I turned and made my way toward the house. I needed to see the bride-to-be. I found Tiana in the master bedroom, staring at her reflection in the full-length mirror. She was wearing a white cocktail dress that probably cost $3,000. She looked beautiful, but there was a tightness around her eyes, a tension in her jaw. When she saw me in the mirror, she spun around. You? She spat. I saw you outside. Why are you wearing black? Are you trying to mourn my happiness? I leaned against the doorframe, crossing my arms. I think it is chic, Tiana. Besides, black is slimming. Not that you need it. You look prosperous. Tiana glared at me. Her eyes dropped to my purse, probably wondering if I had the black Amex she had been trying to use all week. My card got declined at the spa yesterday, she said, her voice whining. And at Sephora. I tried to call the bank, but they said the account was closed. Did you do that, Zora? I feigned innocence. Me? Why would I do that? I am just your big sister, remember? I am just here to support you. Maybe you maxed it out. You have been spending a lot lately. It wasn't maxed out, she snapped. It was reported lost or stolen. Brad had to pay for my facial. It was humiliating. Brad sounds like a keeper, I said. A real provider. Does he know that his future wife is technically insolvent, or did you leave that part out of the prenuptial discussions? Get out! Tiana screamed, pointing a manicured finger at the door. Get out of my room. You are just jealous because I am marrying a Sterling and you are single and bitter. I smiled. See you at the altar, Tiana. I left her fuming and went back outside. The party was in full swing now. I grabbed a glass of champagne from a passing waiter and scanned the crowd. I wasn't here for Tiana. I wasn't here for the shrimp. I was here for one person, Lawrence Sterling. Brad's father was a legend in Atlanta real estate. He was a man who built skyscrapers and golf courses, a man who valued the bottom line above all else. He was standing near the jazz quartet, looking bored, holding a scotch like it was a weapon. He was a shark in a sea of guppies. I made my way over to him, timing my approach perfectly, as his wife drifted away to talk to my mother. Mr. Sterling, I said, extending my hand. It is a pleasure to finally meet you. I am Zora Banks, Tiana's sister. He looked me up and down, his eyes assessing the quality of my dress and the confidence in my stance. He shook my hand, his grip firm and dry. Ah, the sister, he said, his voice a low rumble. I heard you were in finance. Forensic accounting, is that right? That is correct, I said, sipping my champagne. I specialize in asset recovery and fraud detection, mostly corporate but occasionally domestic. His interest piqued. Domestic. You mean divorce? Sometimes, I said, lowering my voice slightly as if sharing a professional secret. But mostly I deal with intergenerational wealth transfer. You would be amazed at how often families hide liabilities from each other. Hidden mortgages, undisclosed liens, gambling debts. It is a fascinating field. The things people will do to maintain an image of wealth when they are actually drowning in red ink. Mr. Sterling went still. He took a slow sip of his scotch, his eyes never leaving my face. He was a smart man. He knew I wasn't talking about the weather. "Is that so?" he said. "And do you find this happens often in Atlanta? Even in respectable neighborhoods?" "Especially in respectable neighborhoods," I said, gesturing vaguely at the party around us. "Take real estate, for example. A house can look perfect on the outside, manicured lawns, fresh paint. But if you pull the title records, you might find it is 3 months away from foreclosure. Or that the equity has been stripped out to pay for luxuries the owners can't afford. It is a house of cards, really. All it takes is one gust of wind." I let the silence hang between us, heavy and pregnant with implication. I saw the gears turning in his head. He looked across the lawn at my father Desmond, who was laughing too loudly and refilling glasses with a manic energy. He looked at the lavish decorations that were clearly beyond the means of a retired civil servant. "You know, Zora," Mr. Sterling said, his tone shifting from polite to probing. "Brad is very taken with your sister. He says she comes from a good, solid family. That means a lot to us. Stability. Integrity. Integrity is everything," I agreed, meeting his gaze levelly. "That is why in my line of work I always advise my clients to do their due diligence. Trust but verify. Check the credit scores. Pull the property deeds. Look at the bank statements, not just the cars in the driveway. Because sometimes the people shouting the loudest about their wealth are the ones who are spending someone else's money." Mr. Sterling didn't say anything for a long moment. He just swirled the ice in his glass. Then he nodded, a microscopic movement that felt like a seismic shift. "Interesting advice, Miss Banks. Very interesting. I might just have my family office look into some due diligence, just to be safe." "You can never be too safe," I said, flashing him a sharp smile, "especially when merging assets. Enjoy the party, Mr. Sterling." I walked away, feeling his eyes boring into my back. I knew what he was going to do. He was going to make a phone call on Monday morning. He was going to run a background check on my parents. He was going to pull the title on this house. And when he saw the name of the lien holder, when he saw the mortgage was held by a shell company controlled by me, he would know. He would know that my parents were frauds. And he would know that Tiana came with a dowry of debt. I circulated through the party for another hour, playing the role of the enigmatic sister. I accepted compliments on my dress. I dodged questions about my apartment. I watched my parents parade around, basking in the glow of their deception, unaware that the ground beneath them was already crumbling. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the perfect lawn, the speeches began. My father climbed onto the small stage holding a microphone. He looked flushed, probably from the expensive scotch he had been drinking all afternoon. "Welcome, everyone," he boomed, his voice echoing over the speakers. "Today we celebrate love. We celebrate family. We celebrate the union of the Banks and the Sterlings." The crowd cheered. Viola stood beside him, beaming like she had just won an Oscar. Tiana and Brad stood in the front row holding hands. Brad looked happy. Tiana looked triumphant. "I look at my daughter, Tiana." Desmond continued, wiping a fake tear from his eye. "And I see a princess. And I want everyone to know that her mother and I would do anything for her. Anything. We would move mountains. We would sell the shirt off our backs to give her the world." I stood in the back of the crowd, hidden in the shadows. I raised my glass in a silent toast. "You didn't sell your shirt, Dad," I whispered. "You sold my roof." Desmond went on, waxing poetic about legacy and honor. It was a masterclass in hypocrisy. I watched Mr. Sterling standing off to the side, his arms crossed, his face unreadable. He wasn't cheering. He was watching Desmond with a new, cold calculation. The seed had been planted. As the band struck up a lively R&B tune and the dancing began, I slipped away. I didn't say goodbye. I didn't need to. I had done what I came to do. I had walked into the lion's den, and I hadn't just survived. I had started a fire. I walked back to my car, the gravel crunching under my heels. The night air was cool on my skin. I felt a vibration in my purse. I pulled out my phone. It was a text from Arthur, my lawyer. "It is ready, Zora. The process server is confirmed for the wedding day. The eviction notice, the lawsuit, and the foreclosure papers. The trifecta." I typed back a single word. "Good." I got into my car and drove away from the lights and the music. I was going back to my hotel room to order room service and sleep the sleep of the righteous. My family was dancing on the deck of the Titanic, and I was the iceberg. The collision was inevitable, and I couldn't wait to watch them sink. Sunday morning in Atlanta brings a heat that feels personal. It is a thick, humid blanket that wraps around the city by 10 in the morning, turning the air into soup and making air conditioning not just a luxury, but a requirement for survival. From the climate-controlled sanctuary of my suite at the St. Regis, I watched the heat shimmer off the pavement 17 stories below. I took a sip of my mimosa and opened my laptop. It was time to initiate phase 2 of my severance package. I had spent the last 5 years being the invisible infrastructure of the Banks family. I was the silent partner in their lifestyle, the one who ensured the lights stayed on, the water ran hot, and the internet was fast enough for Tiana to upload her daily selfies. Because my parents had destroyed their credit rating years ago with missed payments, and that second mortgage, every single utility account for the house in Cascade Heights was in my name. The Georgia Power account, the Atlanta Watershed account, the Xfinity high-speed fiber account. Even the membership dues for the exclusive Rivers Club that my father loved to flash around town were auto-drafted from my checking account. They had lived in a world where bills simply vanished, paid by the magic of Zora. They had forgotten that magic requires a magician, and the magician had just quit. I logged into the Georgia Power portal first. I didn't schedule a transfer of service. I didn't schedule a suspension. I clicked the button for immediate disconnection of service. Reason given: unauthorized occupants. It wasn't a lie. I owned the mortgage. I hadn't authorized them to be there anymore. I clicked confirm. Next was the water, then the cable and internet. Finally, I called the Rivers Club membership office. I spoke to the manager, a woman I had chatted with many times over the years. I told her I was closing the account immediately due to financial restructuring. She sounded disappointed, but processed the cancellation. My father's badge would be flagged at the gate the next time he tried to drive through for a round of golf. With the digital guillotine dropped, I switched tabs on my browser and pulled up the Ring security camera feed. I had paid for the installation of the system 3 years ago, after a string of break-ins in the neighborhood. It ran on a cellular backup separate from the house Wi-Fi specifically, so it would work during power outages. My parents didn't know that. They barely knew how to arm the alarm. The feed loaded, showing me the interior of the living room I had stood in just days before. The scene was set for high drama. My mother, Viola, had insisted on hosting a prayer brunch for the bridal party and the officiating pastor. It was a tradition in our church, a way to bless the union before the chaos of the wedding week began. Pastor Jenkins was sitting in my father's favorite armchair, wiping his brow with a handkerchief. He was a large man with a booming voice and very little tolerance for discomfort. My mother was fluttering around him, offering iced tea and lemon cakes. Tiana was posed on the sofa wearing a white sundress that looked suspiciously like the one I had seen in a magazine for $500. She was holding her phone up, adjusting the ring light she had set up on the coffee table, preparing to livestream the prayer session to her 3,000 followers. My father, Desmond, sat opposite the pastor, trying to look like a patriarch. He was wearing a suit despite the heat, the jacket buttoned tight. He looked nervous. He kept glancing at his phone, probably checking for messages from his creditors, or perhaps wondering why his credit cards were still being declined. I took another sip of my drink and watched the time. It was 11:15. The disconnect orders should be processing right about now. On the screen, Pastor Jenkins cleared his throat and opened his Bible. "Brothers and sisters," he began, his voice rich and deep, "let us bow our heads and invite the Spirit into this home. Let us ask for blessings upon Tiana and Brad as they embark on this holy journey." They bowed their heads. It was a picture of piety, a fraudulent tableau of a God-fearing family. And then the hum stopped. It was subtle at first, the low vibration of the central air conditioning unit, which had been working overtime to battle the 90-degree heat, simply cut out. The ceiling fans, which had been spinning lazily overhead, slowed to a halt. The recessed lighting in the tray ceiling flickered once and died, plunging the room into the dim, natural light filtering through the heavy drapes. Heads snapped up. Viola looked at the ceiling as if the chandelier had offended her. Desmond frowned, checking his watch as if the power outage was running late. "What happened?" Tiana asked, looking at her ring light, which had gone dark. "My light went off. Mom, the power is out." "Just a breaker," Desmond said quickly, his voice booming a little too loud in the sudden silence. "Old houses, you know. I probably have too many things running in the kitchen. I will go flip it back on." "Pastor, please continue." I watched my father march out of the frame toward the basement where the breaker box was. I knew exactly what he would find. The breakers wouldn't be tripped. The smart meter on the side of the house had received a remote kill signal. Pastor Jenkins dabbed at his forehead again. "It is getting a mite warm in here, Sister Viola. Perhaps we could open a window." Viola looked stricken. Open the windows in July in Atlanta? It would be like opening the door to a blast furnace. But she couldn't refuse the pastor. "Of course, Pastor. Just for a moment until Desmond fixes the fuse." She went to the windows, throwing back the heavy velvet curtains I had paid for. Harsh sunlight flooded the room, illuminating the dust motes and the sweat already beginning to sheen on Tiana's upper lip. Desmond returned a moment later looking flustered. His suit jacket was unbuttoned now. "It is not the breaker," he muttered. "Must be a line down in the neighborhood. I will call the power company. Apologies, everyone. Just a minor inconvenience." He pulled out his phone. I watched him dial, put the phone to his ear, and then pull it away, staring at the screen. He tried again. I knew what he was hearing. The automated message asking for the account holder's social security number or PIN, neither of which he had. Tiana let out a shriek that the microphone picked up clearly. "Mom, the Wi-Fi is down. I can't stream. The signal is dead. I have followers waiting. Brad's family is supposed to be watching this. Use your data." "Tiana?" Viola snapped her own composure, fraying as the temperature in the room climbed. "I can't." Tiana whined. "The service in this house is terrible, you know that. That is why Zora got the fiber installed. Zora, fix it. Call Zora." The mention of my name made Desmond freeze. He looked at Viola. A look of dawning horror passed between them. They realized it. Finally. They realized that the invisible hand that kept their world turning had been attached to the daughter they had discarded. "Call her," Viola hissed. "Fix this, Desmond. We cannot have the pastor sitting here in a sweatbox." I watched Desmond dial my number. My phone, which was currently sitting at the bottom of a water glass in my hotel room, obviously did not ring. I watched him grow more and more agitated as it went to voicemail. "She is not picking up," he whispered harshly. "We'll try again," Viola said, smiling tightly at the pastor, who was now fanning himself with a paper napkin. "More iced tea. Pastor, ice. We need more ice." Viola hurried toward the kitchen. I switched the camera view to the kitchen feed. I watched her grab a pitcher and go to the refrigerator dispenser. She pressed the lever. Nothing came out. She frowned and tried the sink faucet. A pathetic dribble of water followed by a hollow gurgling sound, and then nothing. The water was off. Viola dropped the pitcher. It shattered on the tile floor, but she didn't even look at it. She gripped the edge of the counter, her knuckles white. She realized that this wasn't an accident. This was an eviction. Back in the living room, the situation was deteriorating rapidly. The temperature was rising. The house, built in the 50s, held heat like a thermos. Without the AC circulating air, it was becoming stifling. Pastor Jenkins was sweating profusely, his shirt collar damp. "Brother Desmond," he said, his voice losing its patience. "Perhaps we should reschedule. The Lord hears our prayers just as well in air conditioning. No, no, Desmond pleaded. It is just a neighborhood glitch. I am sure it will be back on any second. Look, I will check the neighbors. He ran to the front window and peered out. I knew what he would see. The neighbors' lights were on, the street lamps were humming, the irrigation systems next door were spraying happily. The darkness was localized entirely to the bank's residence. It is just us, Tiana said, her voice rising to a panic. Why is it just us, Dad? What is going on? I can't do my makeup in the dark. I can't stream. My reception dinner is in 4 hours and I need to shower. She stomped toward the stairs, intending to go check her bathroom. I knew what she would find. No water meant no shower, no flushing toilets. Viola came back into the living room. She looked pale. There is no water, Desmond. The taps are dry. Pastor Jenkins stood up. No power and no water. He looked at Desmond with a suspicion that cut deeper than any sermon. Brother Banks, did you pay the bills? I know times can be tight, but… Of course I paid the bills, Desmond sputtered, indignant and humiliated. I am a deacon, for heaven's sake. This is a mistake, a clerical error. I will have the utility company president on the phone in 5 minutes. He was bluffing and everyone knew it. You don't get your water and power cut on a Sunday morning for a clerical error. You get cut off because you haven't paid, or because the person who was paying has decided to stop. I am leaving, Pastor Jenkins said, smoothing his suit. I cannot bless a union in a house that is falling apart. Call me when you have your affairs in order. He walked out. The heavy door slammed shut with a finality that shook the walls. The silence that followed was broken only by Tiana's sobbing. This is Zora, she wailed, throwing her phone onto the couch. She did this. She cut us off. She is ruining my wedding on purpose. She wouldn't dare. Desmond roared, though his eyes were terrified. She doesn't have the power. She paid the bills, Dad, Tiana screamed. You told me she handled the accounts so you didn't have to worry about the details. Well, she stopped handling them. We are sitting in the dark because you stole her apartment, and now she is stealing our electricity. Viola sank onto the chaise lounge, the same one she had sat on while drinking champagne and mocking me. She looked old in the dim light. Her makeup was melting. Her sequined dress looked cheap. She is really doing it, Viola whispered. She is actually fighting back. I took a sip of my drink, watching them turn on each other. Desmond yelling at Tiana to shut up. Tiana screaming that she smelled like sweat and couldn't get married like this. Viola staring into space, realizing that the ATM had not only stopped dispensing cash but had eaten her card. It was a disaster. It was humiliating. It was the perfect appetizer for the main course I had planned for the wedding day. I closed the laptop. I didn't need to watch anymore. I knew how this scene ended. They would scramble. They would go to a hotel using one of the few credit cards they had left that wasn't linked to me. They would try to spin a story about a transformer blowing out. They would lie to Brad. They would lie to the Sterlings. But they would know. And deep down they would be terrified. Because if I could turn off the sun in their world, what else could I do? I stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the Atlanta skyline. The heat was oppressive even through the glass, but I felt cool, calculated. I picked up the folder Arthur had given me. The foreclosure documents were ready. The process server was booked. Let them sweat, I thought. Let them sit in the dark and think about what they did. Because when the lights come back on, it won't be the power company saving them. It will be the sheriff coming to throw them out. I ordered room service. I had a big week ahead of me, and I needed to be well rested for the finale. Tuesday afternoon brought a different kind of storm, one that was entirely man-made and centered precisely on the shoe department of Neiman Marcus at Lenox Square. I was sitting in Arthur's office sipping an espresso and watching the digital clock on the wall. I knew Tiana's schedule better than she knew it herself, because I had been the one managing her calendar for years. Today was listed as bridal party pampering, followed by shoe selection. It was a ritual of consumption designed to show off to her bridesmaids that she was entering the upper echelon of Atlanta society. Tiana loved to spend money, especially when it wasn't hers. She treated my American Express Platinum card like a magic wand, waving it to make problems disappear and luxuries appear. She didn't know that the wand was broken. Arthur sat across from me, a digital recorder placed precisely in the center of the mahogany desk. He looked like a predator waiting for a rabbit to step into a snare. "She is going to call," he said, not asking a question. "She is going to scream," I corrected him. "And when she does, we will have it all on tape. Harassment threats and admission of financial dependency. It goes to the character argument for the custody of the assets later." The phone rang at 2:14 exactly. The screen lit up with Tiana's name. I nodded to Arthur. He pressed the red record button. I tapped the speakerphone icon and set the device down. Zora. The scream was so loud it distorted the speaker. The sound of background chatter and retail music cut out instantly, replaced by the jagged edge of my sister's panic. "Zora, pick up the phone right now. This hato. I am here, Tiana," I said, my voice calm and level, the voice of a customer service agent handling an irate toddler. "Is there a problem? Is there a problem?" she shrieked. "I am at Neiman's. I am standing at the register with 6 pairs of Jimmy Choos, and my bridesmaids are watching me. The cashier just cut my card. Zora." She cut it in half with scissors. She said it was reported stolen. There was a pause where I could hear her heavy breathing and the hushed whispers of the people around her. The humiliation was palpable even over the cellular network. "I reported it stolen yesterday," I said simply. "I noticed a lot of unusual activity recently. Thousands of dollars in charges at spas and boutiques. I assumed someone had cloned my card, so I shut it down for security." "You know that was me," Tiana yelled, her voice cracking. "You authorized me on that account years ago. I have been using it for the wedding prep. You are doing this on purpose. You are trying to embarrass me." I leaned back in the leather chair, exchanging a look with Arthur. "I authorized you for emergencies, Tiana. School books. Medical copays. I didn't authorize you to buy $1,200 shoes for your friends. And since I am currently homeless because our parents sold my apartment to pay for your wedding, I have to be very careful with my finances. I can't support your lifestyle anymore." There was a silence on the line, a vacuum where the entitlement used to be. Then her voice dropped to a hiss, venomous and low. "Fix it, Zora. Call the bank right now. Tell them it was a mistake. The manager is looking at me like I am a criminal. My friends are whispering. Do you have any idea how bad this looks? Fix it, or I swear to God, I will tell everyone you are jealous and vindictive." "I am not calling anyone," I said. "That account is closed, Tiana. It is gone." "But I am confused. Why are you calling me for money? Mom told me she sold my condo for over $300,000. She said they had plenty of liquid cash now. She said they were investing in your future." I let the words hang there, heavy and undeniable. "Why don't you use some of that money?" Tiana asked Mom and Dad. "Surely they didn't spend $300,000 in 3 days. Use the wedding fund. That is what my home was sacrificed for, right?" Tiana made a noise of pure frustration, a guttural growl. "You know I can't do that. Mom says that money is tied up in vendor deposits in the venue. She doesn't have access to it right this second. And Dad's cards aren't working either. They said it is a bank error, but it is not a bank error," I interrupted. "It is a reality check." "Listen to me, you little witch," Tiana screamed, losing all control. "I need these shoes. The fitting is tomorrow. If I don't have the shoes, the hem will be wrong. Brad's mother is coming to the fitting. If I look like a mess, she will judge me. You have to pay for this, Zora. You owe me. You are the big sister. It is your job to take care of us." "I don't owe you anything," I said, my voice dropping to a register of absolute coldness. "I paid your tuition. I paid for your car. I paid for the roof over your head. And in return, you and our parents stole my equity and kicked me onto the street. The Bank of Zora is closed, Tiana. Permanently. If you want the shoes, pay for them yourself. Or better yet, ask your rich fiancé. Isn't that why you are marrying him? Zora, please, she begged, her anger suddenly collapsing into desperation. Just this once, I will pay you back. I promise. Everyone is looking at me. Please. I looked at the recorder spinning silently on the desk, capturing every beg, every threat, every admission that she knew about the stolen money. No, I said. I hung up the phone. Arthur reached out and stopped the recording. He looked at me with a mixture of awe and slight fear. That was brutal, he said. It was necessary, I replied. She needs to learn that actions have consequences. She thought she could take everything from me, and I would still be there to catch her when she fell. She needs to hit the floor. We sat there for a moment in the silence of the office, imagining the scene unfolding miles away in the luxury wing of the mall. I could picture it clearly. Tiana standing there empty-handed, her face burning with shame, the cashier handing back the pieces of the plastic card, the bridesmaids looking at each other wondering if the rumors about the bank's family money were true. Tiana wouldn't leave empty-handed, though. Her pride wouldn't allow it. She would make the call she dreaded the most. 10 minutes later, my theory was confirmed. My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number, but I knew who it was immediately. It was a screenshot forwarded to me by one of the bridesmaids, a girl named Keisha, who had always liked me more than Tiana. It was a picture of Tiana crying in the parking lot, holding her phone to her ear. The caption read, "Trouble in Paradise." She had to call Brad to bail her out. He did not look happy. I zoomed in on the photo. Tiana looked small and pathetic, her perfect makeup ruined. But it was the look on her face that struck me. It wasn't just sadness. It was fear. She was realizing that the safety net was gone. Brad Sterling was a nice guy from what I knew. But he was also a man raised in a family where money was discussed with accountants, not screamed about in mall parking lots. He had been told that the Banks family was wealthy and stable. He had been told that Tiana was an heiress in her own right. Now he was getting a call in the middle of a workday, asking him to pay for shoes, because her cards were declined and her parents were tapped out. He was going to ask questions. He was going to wonder why a family that just bragged about a 6-figure wedding budget couldn't cover a shopping trip. The cracks were forming. I looked at Arthur. She called Brad. He nodded, writing a note on his legal pad. Good. That puts pressure on the fiancé. He starts asking questions about the finances. Desmond and Viola have to lie to cover it up. The more they lie, the more likely they are to make a mistake. We are squeezing them from both sides, Zora. From the bottom with the debts, and from the top with the social pressure. And tomorrow is the rehearsal dinner, I said. Arthur smiled. The rehearsal dinner. Where you are supposed to give a speech. I said, standing up and smoothing my skirt. And I have prepared something very special. I think it is time the family heard a toast to the truth. I walked out of the office, leaving the recording behind. The first domino had fallen. Tiana had been humiliated in her natural habitat. Her financial impotence had been exposed to her friends and her future husband. She was rattled, but she was still standing. She still thought she could cry her way out of it. She still thought the wedding would fix everything. She didn't know that the wedding was the trap. And she had just walked right into the center of it. The numbers on the spreadsheet glowing on my laptop screen told a story of financial suicide that was almost impressive in its recklessness. I sat in the quiet of my hotel suite, the hum of the mini fridge, the only sound accompanying the destruction of my parents' legacy. I had spent the last 48 hours digging through public records and banking data, utilizing every skill I had honed as a forensic accountant. What I found was not just negligence, it was a conscious choice to jump off a cliff. My parents had received a windfall of over $300,000 from the fraudulent sale of my condo. A rational person would have looked at their crumbling financial foundation and used that lifeline to secure their shelter. They would have paid off the high-interest credit cards. They would have brought their mortgage current. But Desmond and Viola Banks were not rational people. They were addicts addicted to the appearance of wealth and the validation of their social circle. I had been monitoring the title status of the Cascade Heights house for months, even before they betrayed me. It was a habit born of anxiety, a safety mechanism I had developed to protect myself from their inevitable crashes. I knew they were 90 days delinquent on their mortgage. I knew the bank had sent the notice of intent to accelerate. They were standing on the edge of a financial abyss, and instead of building a bridge, they were buying Swarovski crystal centerpieces and booking 5-star honeymoon suites for Tiana. They had the money to save their home. They had it sitting in their account right now, proceeds from the theft of my property. But they had chosen not to pay the bank. They had gambled that they could pull off the wedding of the century, impress the Sterling family, and perhaps secure a financial bailout from their new rich in-laws before the bank came knocking. They were betting everything on Tiana marrying well. They didn't know that the bank had already knocked, and I had answered the door. 2 days ago, I sat in a glass-walled conference room in Midtown, across from a distressed debt broker named Mr. Henderson. He didn't know I was Desmond Banks' daughter. He only knew me as the representative of ZB Holdings LLC, an anonymous shell company I had registered in Delaware specifically for this moment. I had approached his firm with a very specific request. I wanted to purchase a portfolio of non-performing residential notes in the Cascade Heights area. Specifically, one note. Buying a non-performing mortgage is a risky investment for most people. You are buying the right to collect a debt that someone has already proven they cannot or will not pay. You are buying a headache, a legal battle, and a likely eviction process. But for me, it was the surest bet of my life. Mr. Henderson had looked at me with curiosity when I singled out the bank's mortgage. It was a toxic asset deep in the red. The bank was eager to offload it to get it off their books before the fiscal quarter ended. They were willing to sell the debt for 60 cents on the dollar, just to recoup some of their loss. I wired the funds without hesitation. It was a significant portion of my remaining liquid savings money I had squirreled away in investment accounts my parents didn't know existed. It was my freedom fund, my rainy day savings, and I was spending almost all of it to buy my parents' debt. When Henderson pushed the assignment of mortgage document across the table and I signed my name as the managing member of the LLC, the shift in the universe was palpable. I felt a cold thrill run down my spine that was more intoxicating than any champagne. I wasn't just their daughter anymore. I wasn't the doormat they wiped their feet on. I wasn't the piggy bank they broke open whenever they wanted a treat. I was the institution. I was the lender. I was the one entity my father feared more than God, and more than the loss of his reputation. I was the bank. Technically and legally, ZB Holdings LLC now owned the note on the house I grew up in. I held the lien. I held the power to forgive the debt, restructure the payments, or demand the full balance immediately due to default. And since the mortgage was already 3 months past due, and the borrowers had shown no intent to cure the default, I had every legal right to initiate foreclosure proceedings immediately. I looked at the digital copy of the deed on my screen. It was beautiful in its brutality. My parents were currently sleeping in a bed that belonged to me. They were hosting parties in a living room that belonged to me. They were planning a wedding on a lawn that belonged to me. They thought they had outsmarted me by selling my apartment. They thought they had liquidated my only asset. They didn't realize that by doing so, they had given me the moral and tactical justification to take theirs. They had broken the social contract of family. They had stolen from me first. Now it was just a business transaction. I picked up my phone and called Arthur. "Did the transfer clear?" I asked. "It cleared 20 minutes ago." Arthur confirmed, his voice tinged with a mixture of professional admiration and personal unease. "You own the paper, Zora. The assignment is being recorded at the county clerk's office as we speak. ZB Holdings is the lien holder of record." "Good," I said. "Prepare the notice of acceleration." "You want to send it now?" Arthur asked. "No," I said, watching the sun dip below the Atlanta skyline. "If we send it now, they might panic. They might actually use some of the wedding money to pay the arrears just to save face. They have the liquidity at this exact moment Because they haven't paid the final vendor bills yet. I don't want them to pay. I don't want their money. I want the house. Arthur remained silent, waiting for my instruction. Wait until the funds are gone, I said. Wait until they have written the checks for the catering, the venue, and the flowers. Wait until they are cash poor again. Wait until the wedding day. I want the foreclosure notice served at the reception, Arthur. I want the sheriff to hand it to my father while he is eating the steak he bought with my money. I want him to realize that he spent his mortgage payment on a party and now he is homeless. That is nuclear, Arthur said quietly. That is a scorched earth strategy, Zora. There is no coming back from that. They burned the bridge, Arthur. I said, my voice flat. I am just blowing up the ruins. I hung up the phone and looked back at the spreadsheet. I traced the lines of their financial deception. I saw where they had robbed Peter to pay Paul. I saw the lies they told themselves to sleep at night. They believed they were entitled to the lifestyle they projected. They believed the world owed them luxury. They believed I owed them my existence. Now they owed me. They owed me hundreds of thousands of dollars. They owed me a home. And since they couldn't pay in cash, they were going to pay in consequences. I was the bank. And the bank was coming to collect. The foreclosure wasn't just a legal proceeding anymore, it was an exorcism. I was going to evict their greed, their entitlement, and their cruelty from my life. And I was going to do it with the full force of the law behind me. I closed my laptop. The trap was set. The bait was taken. Now all I had to do was put on my dress, go to the rehearsal dinner, and smile while the steel jaws snapped shut. Wednesday brought a suffocating tension to Atlanta that had nothing to do with the humidity. The anonymous envelope I had mailed to Brad Sterling 2 days prior had arrived at his penthouse office that morning. Inside was a simple single sheet of paper listing my father's gambling debts from the underground poker games he frequented in East Point. It wasn't an official credit report, but it was specific enough, dates, times, and amounts, to be terrifying. I knew Brad would read it. I knew he was a man who prided himself on logic and facts, and this piece of paper was a jagged stone thrown into the smooth lake of his engagement. I arranged to bump into him at the coffee shop near his office around 10. It wasn't a coincidence. I knew his schedule because Tiana had bragged about it incessantly. When I walked in, he was sitting in a corner booth staring at a black coffee like it might bite him. He looked pale, the confidence of the sterling air drained away, leaving behind a scared boy who realized he might have bought a lemon. "Zora," he said when he saw me, his voice filled with relief. "Thank God. Do you have a minute?" I feigned surprise, checking my watch. "I suppose I have a moment. Is everything okay, Brad? You look terrible." He pulled the envelope from his jacket pocket and slid it across the table. "Someone sent this to me. No return address. It says Desmond owes $40,000 to some bad people. It says he gambled away his pension. Zora, tell me this isn't true. Tell me this is just someone trying to sabotage the wedding." I picked up the paper. I didn't need to read it. I had typed it. I looked at him, my expression softening into a mask of sisterly concern, mixed with reluctant shame. I sighed a long, heavy exhale that signaled deep family burdens. "Brad," I said, keeping my voice low, "you have to understand Dad has hobbies. He likes the thrill. He always says he has a system. We try not to talk about it in the family because it upsets Mom." Brad's face fell. "So it is true. He is broke." I reached across the table and patted his hand. "Being cash poor isn't a crime, Brad. He loves Tiana. He wants to give her the world even if he has to borrow it. But you didn't hear that from me. I am just saying maybe keep your finances separate for a while, just until he gets back on his feet." I watched the doubt take root. It wasn't just a weed anymore, it was a vine choking the life out of his fairy tale. He nodded slowly, taking the paper back. "I need to talk to Tiana." I watched him leave his coffee untouched. He was going to confront her, and I knew exactly how that would go. 2 hours later, I was sitting in the parlor of my parents' house pretending to help with seating charts when Brad's Porsche pulled into the driveway. Tiana was upstairs still complaining about her declined credit card. When Brad walked in, he didn't look angry, he looked desperate. He wanted Tiana to tell him it was a lie. He wanted to believe the fantasy. He went upstairs. I sat at the bottom of the steps straining my ears. At first, there were murmurs. Then Brad's voice raised, asking about the debts, asking about the house, asking why my father's cards were declining. And then the explosion happened. Tiana didn't argue facts. She didn't produce bank statements. She went nuclear with emotion. "How could you?" She screamed, her voice shrill enough to shatter glass. "You trust some anonymous letter over me. You trust gossip over the woman you are marrying. My father is a saint, he has sacrificed everything for us. And you come into my house and accuse him of being a junkie." I heard sobbing. Loud theatrical sobbing. It was Tiana's greatest weapon. She weaponized her tears, turning herself into the victim so quickly it would give you whiplash. "I thought you loved me," she wailed. "I thought you were different. But you are just like everyone else, trying to tear my family down because you are jealous of what we have. If you don't trust me, Brad, then leave. Just go. I can't marry a man who thinks my father is a criminal." It was a masterclass in gaslighting. She shifted the burden of proof onto him. She made his reasonable questions seem like a betrayal of love. Silence followed, then the sound of murmuring. Then the door opened, and they came down the stairs. Tiana was clinging to his arm, her eyes red and puffy, looking fragile and wounded. Brad looked defeated. He had folded. He had chosen the lie because the truth was too painful to accept this close to the wedding. "I am sorry," Zora, Tiana said, sniffing delicately as they passed me. "Brad and I just had a little misunderstanding. People are trying to break us apart, but our love is stronger than hate." "Right," I said dryly. "Stronger than hate." Brad wouldn't meet my eyes. He felt guilty for doubting her. He felt like a bad partner. Tiana had played him perfectly, but there was someone she couldn't play. I looked out the window and saw a black sedan parked across the street. The window rolled down just an inch. It was Lawrence Sterling, Brad's father. He wasn't looking at Tiana with love. He was looking at the house with the cold, hard stare of an auditor. He had seen his son go in agitated and come out pacified. He knew his son was soft. But Lawrence was granite. He didn't need a letter to know something was rotting in Denmark. He picked up his phone and made a call. I knew in my bones he was calling his private investigators, telling them to dig deeper. He smelled blood. I waited until Tiana went to the kitchen to get ice for her eyes, and Brad went outside to call his best man. I followed him out. He was pacing by the pool, looking at the water that was slowly turning green because the pump had been shut off with the electricity yesterday and only recently restored via a noisy generator Desmond had rented. "Brad," I said, approaching him gently. "Can I give you some advice, big sister to little brother?" He looked at me, his eyes pleading for reassurance. "I feel like a jerk, Zora. She was so upset. I shouldn't have listened to the rumors." "You aren't a jerk," I said. "You are cautious. And you have a lot to lose. Listen, Tiana is proud. The whole family is. They talk about money like it is oxygen, but they get offended if you check the tank." "I know," he sighed. "I just want to protect her." "Then protect her," I said, dropping the trap. "Sign a prenuptial agreement." Brad recoiled. "What?" "No," she would flip out. "She would think I don't trust her." "No, Brad, listen to me. Frame it as protecting her. Tell her you know how proud she is of her family's legacy. Tell her you want to make sure that no matter what happens, her assets remain hers and yours remain yours. Tell her it is to stop the gossip. If you sign a prenup that keeps everything separate, people can't say she is marrying you for money. It proves it is for love." I watched the idea land. It appealed to his romanticism, but it also appealed to his logic. "It proves it is for love," he repeated slowly. "Exactly," I said. "And honestly, Brad, with the way my dad handles money, if you commingle your assets and he gets into trouble again, creditors could come after you." A prenup protects Tiana from his mistakes too. You are being the knight in shining armor. He nodded, the tension leaving his shoulders. You are right. That makes sense. It protects everyone. God, Zora. You are the only one who talks sense. Thank you. I smiled, a genuine warm smile that didn't reach my eyes. Just looking out for the family Brad. I walked back inside. The trap was set. Brad would demand a prenup thinking he was being noble. Tiana would have to sign it because refusing would prove she was a gold digger after her dramatic speech about love being more important than money. And when I took the house and the savings and the car, that prenup would ensure she couldn't use Brad's money to bail herself out. She would be entering the marriage with zero assets and zero access to his fortune. She would be destitute with a ring on her finger. I walked past the dining room where my mother was counting the silver, making sure everything was perfect for the rehearsal dinner. She looked up at me, suspicious. What were you talking to Brad about? Oh, nothing, Mom, I said breezily, picking up a grape from the fruit bowl. Just giving him some marriage advice, making sure he knows how lucky he is to have Tiana. Viola relaxed, a smug smile spreading across her face. Good. I am glad you are finally getting on board, Zora. Maybe you are learning your place after all. I chewed the grape, tasting the sweetness. Oh, I knew my place. My place was in the driver's seat of the bulldozer that was currently idling just out of sight, waiting for my signal to flatten everything she loved. I checked my watch. 24 hours until the rehearsal dinner. 24 hours until I stood up with a microphone and burned the first layer of their reality to ash. I headed to the guest room to lay out my dress. It was going to be a night to remember. The Aurelia was the kind of restaurant where they didn't put prices on the menu because if you had to ask, you couldn't afford the water. It sat atop the highest hotel in downtown Atlanta, offering a 360-degree view of the city I was about to set on fire. The room was bathed in the glow of crystal chandeliers and the table was set with enough silverware to finance a small revolution. It was the perfect stage for the Banks family's final performance. I sat at the end of the long table watching my parents trying to blend in with the Sterlings. It was painful to watch. Lawrence Sterling and his wife were effortless in their wealth, eating their lobster bisque with the casual indifference of people who owned the boat that caught it. My parents, on the other hand, were trying too hard. My mother, Viola, was laughing too loudly at jokes she didn't understand, and my father, Desmond, was sweating through his tuxedo, looking like a man waiting for a jury verdict. Tiana sat next to Brad, clutching his hand like a lifeline. She looked beautiful, but brittle. The prenup conversation had rattled her. She had signed it earlier that afternoon, furious and weeping in Arthur's conference room, but she had signed it because she had no choice. Now she needed a win. She needed to cement her status before the ink dried. She caught my eye from across the table and jerked her head toward the restroom. It wasn't a request. It was a summons. I took a slow sip of my wine, enjoying the way her eyes narrowed before I stood up and followed her. The bathroom was lined with marble and smelled of orchids. Tiana turned on me the moment the heavy door clicked shut. "You need to fix this," she hissed, checking her reflection in the gilded mirror. "Brad's father is asking questions. He asked Dad about his pension. He asked about the title on the house. You need to make a toast, Zora." I leaned against the marble sink, crossing my arms. "A toast. You want me to wish you luck?" "I want you to tell them about the apartment," Tiana said, turning to face me, her eyes hard. "I want you to stand up there and say that you gave the condo to Mom and Dad to sell as a wedding gift for me. I want you to say it loud and clear so Lawrence Sterling hears it. If you say it was a gift, it legitimizes the money. It stops the investigation." "You want me to lie?" I asked, my voice calm. "You want me to tell a room full of millionaires that I voluntarily gave up my home so you could have a chocolate fountain? I want you to be a sister," she snapped. "Look, Zora, I know you are mad, but the money is gone. The apartment is sold. You can't get it back. So you might as well use it to help me secure this marriage. Once I am a Sterling, I will make it up to you. I will buy you a new car. I will get Brad to invest in your little accounting firm. Just do this for me. My little accounting firm." The insult slid off me like water off a duck. She still didn't get it. She thought she was negotiating from a position of power. She didn't know the barrel of the gun was already pressed against her temple. "Fine," I said, smoothing the fabric of my dress. "I will give a toast. I will tell them exactly how generous our family is." Tiana exhaled, her shoulders dropping in relief. "Thank you. Just make it sound good, Zora. Make us look good." I smiled at her in the mirror. "Oh, Tiana, I am going to make you look unforgettable." We walked back into the dining room. The main course had been cleared, and waiters were pouring champagne. Tiana sat down and nudged my mother, whispering in her ear. Viola looked at me, her eyes wide with warning, then nodded stiffly. Desmond tapped his glass with a silver spoon. The room fell silent. "Everyone," he announced, his voice booming with false bravado. "My eldest daughter Zora would like to say a few words." All eyes turned to me. Lawrence Sterling looked interested. Brad looked nervous. My parents looked like they were praying for a miracle. I stood up, holding my flute of champagne. I let the silence stretch for a moment, gathering the tension in the room, pulling it tight until it hummed. "Good evening, everyone," I began, my voice clear and projecting to the back of the room. "It is an honor to be here tonight to celebrate Tiana and Brad. You know they say you can't choose your family. And looking around this table tonight, I realize how true that is." I smiled at the Sterlings. They smiled back, polite and unsuspecting. I grew up watching Tiana. I continued, turning my gaze to my sister. From the time she was a little girl, she always knew exactly what she wanted. And she had a special gift, a true talent for taking it. Whether it was the last cookie in the jar or the spotlight in the room, Tiana has always believed that she deserves the very best. And she never lets little things like rules or ownership stand in her way. There was a ripple of laughter from the guests. They thought I was being charmingly roasty. Tiana's smile faltered slightly, but she kept it plastered on. "And my parents," I said, looking at Desmond and Viola, "the architects of this beautiful evening. You have to admire them, really. They are true magicians. I have watched them pull rabbits out of hats my entire life. They have this incredible ability to make things appear out of thin air. Money, lifestyle, status. They are financial illusionists. They taught us that if you believe in the dream hard enough, the reality doesn't matter." Desmond dropped his napkin. Viola's hand flew to her throat, clutching her pearls. They knew. They heard the double meaning screaming beneath the surface. Lawrence Sterling stopped smiling. He leaned forward, his eyes narrowing. "But tonight isn't about the past," I said, raising my glass higher. "It is about the future. Tiana, my generous parents, sold a very valuable asset to give you this wedding. They sacrificed a home to give you a party. That is a level of commitment that is rare. It is a gift that cost more than you will ever know." I paused, looking directly at Tiana. "So my wish for you, sister, is that you get exactly what you deserve. May this marriage be everything you paid for, and may you always remember who footed the bill." To Tiana and Brad. To Tiana and Brad, the room echoed. I drank my champagne. It was crisp and cold. I sat down. Under the table, Tiana kicked me. Her face was a mask of fury, but she couldn't say a word. She had gotten what she asked for. I had mentioned the gift. I had legitimized the money. But I had done it in a way that made Lawrence Sterling look at my father with the cold calculation of a man who just realized he was sitting across from a con artist. The dinner continued, but the air had changed. The Sterlings were quiet. Brad looked sick. My parents were whispering furiously to each other, avoiding eye contact with everyone. I checked my watch. It was 9 o'clock. The process server was scheduled to meet Arthur at the courthouse at 8 tomorrow morning to pick up the packet. The sheriff's deputies were booked for the reception at 7. Everything was in motion. I stood up again, gathering my purse. Viola grabbed my wrist as I passed her chair. Her grip was bruising. Her face was a shade of purple I had never seen before. "What was that?" she hissed. "What did you just do?" "I gave a toast, Mom," I said, pulling my arm free. "I did exactly what Tiana asked." I told them about the sacrifice. You sounded like you were mocking us. Viola whispered, tears of rage welling in her eyes. You embarrassed us, Zora. Lawrence is looking at us like we are criminals. Maybe he just has good instincts, I said. Where are you going? Desmond demanded, looking up from his fifth scotch. The night is young, you can't leave. I have to go, Dad, I said loud enough for the Sterlings to hear. I have a very busy day tomorrow. I have some big moves to make. You know how it is in finance. The market waits for no one. I walked over to the Sterlings. It was lovely to meet you, I said, shaking Lawrence's hand again. Enjoy the wedding tomorrow. It is going to be quite a production. I will be watching, Lawrence said, his voice devoid of warmth. Closely. I walked out of the restaurant, my heels clicking on the marble floor. I didn't look back at my family. I didn't need to. I knew what they looked like. They looked like people standing on a trapdoor, waiting for the lever to be pulled. I went back to my hotel room. I laid out my outfit for the wedding. I wasn't wearing a bridesmaid dress. I wasn't wearing black. I was wearing red. Bright, unapologetic blood red. It was a power color. It was a victory color. I turned off the lights and stood by the window looking out at the city one last time. Somewhere out there in the dark, my apartment was empty, stripped of everything I loved. Somewhere else, my parents were probably arguing, trying to figure out how to spin my toast. They thought the worst was over. They thought they had survived the rehearsal. They didn't know that the rehearsal was just the sound check. The real show started tomorrow. And I was the director, the producer, and the star. I climbed into bed and slept soundly. Tomorrow I was going to collect my debt. And I was going to do it in front of 300 witnesses. The morning sun beat down on the manicured gardens of the Chateau Elan, looking for all the world like a spotlight waiting for its star performer. I stood on the balcony of my room watching the ants scurry below. By ants I meant my family and the army of vendors they had hired to construct their fantasy. Trucks were unloading thousands of white hydrangeas. A string quartet was setting up under the gazebo. It was a production worthy of Broadway, and it was costing money that didn't exist. I finished my coffee and turned to the garment bag hanging on the door. I had changed my mind about the red dress. Red was for passion. Red was for celebration. Today wasn't a celebration, it was a funeral for their reputation. I unzipped the bag and pulled out the black silk gown. It was floor-length, structural, and severe, reminiscent of something a widow might wear to the reading of a will where she knows she gets everything. I slipped it on. It fit like armor. Downstairs, the cracks in the foundation were already starting to show. I walked through the service corridor, avoiding the guests, and found my father Desmond standing near the loading dock. He was surrounded by the florist, the caterer, and a man who looked like he was in charge of the lighting. Desmond was sweating profusely, his face a mask of panic that he was trying desperately to hide behind a genial smile. There seems to be a technical issue with the terminal, the florist said, holding up a credit card reader. We tried 3 different cards, Mr. Banks. They are all coming back declined. Code 05, do not honor. Desmond laughed, a nervous braying sound. Technology, right? It is always acting up. Look, just run it again later. Or send me an invoice. I am good for it. You know who I am. I am a deacon at Ebenezer. The caterer crossed his arms. He wasn't impressed by the deacon title. Mr. Banks, our contract states final payment is due before the first cork is popped. That is $40,000. We can't start service without it. I watched from the shadows as my father, the man who had strutted through life on borrowed confidence, shrank. He patted his pockets. He looked around for a lifeline. He pulled out a checkbook. I will write you a check, he said, his hand trembling slightly. A personal check. The vendors exchanged looks. They knew. They could smell the desperation. But they were already here. The food was cooked. The flowers were cut. They were trapped too. Fine, the caterer said, his voice cold. But if this bounces, I am calling the police before the cake is cut. Desmond signed the check with a flourish, trying to regain his dignity. It won't bounce. Now please, let's get this show on the road. My daughter is waiting. I stepped out of the shadows then. My heels clicked rhythmically on the concrete. Desmond spun around. When he saw me in the black dress, his eyes widened. "Zora," he hissed. "What are you wearing? You look like you are going to a wake." I adjusted my sunglasses. "I am just dressing for the occasion, Dad." "The death of your credit score seems like a somber event." He grabbed my arm, pulling me away from the vendors. "Don't start, not today. We barely fixed the mess you made with the utilities. Tiana had to get ready at the hotel because the house is still a sauna. If you do anything to ruin this, I swear." He stopped. He saw the two men standing behind me. They were large, broad-shouldered men in ill-fitting suits. They weren't guests. They weren't staff. "Who are they?" Desmond asked, his voice faltering. "Associates," I said, simply. "They are here to ensure everything goes according to plan." Desmond looked at them, then back at me. A flicker of true fear passed behind his eyes. He didn't ask any more questions. He turned and walked away, disappearing into the venue to play the role of the proud father one last time. I signaled to the men, "Stay close but out of sight until the signal." They nodded. They were off duty. Sheriff's deputies, earning triple overtime paid for by the same account that used to pay my parents' water bill. They knew the drill. They had the paperwork in their jackets. I made my way to the bridal suite. It was a scene of controlled chaos. Makeup artists were hovering over Tiana, applying layers of sealant to waterproof her face against the tears she had been shedding all morning. Viola was fussing with the veil, her hands shaking. When I walked in, the room went quiet. Tiana saw my reflection in the mirror. "Black," she said, her voice flat. "You wore black. Of course you did. You are trying to curse me." I sat down on a velvet ottoman, crossing my legs. "It is couture, Tiana, and technically it is midnight onyx. I thought it provided a nice contrast to your innocence." Viola glared at me. "You look beautiful, Tiana. Don't listen to her. She is just jealous. Look at this dress. It cost $12,000. It is a masterpiece." "It is a masterpiece," I agreed. "It is amazing what you can buy with stolen equity." Tiana spun around in her chair. "Get out. Get out right now. I don't want you here until the photos." I stood up. "As you wish. I just came to check on the bride. Make sure you haven't gotten cold feet. Or a conscience. I have nothing to feel guilty about," Tiana said, lifting her chin. "I deserve this. I deserve to be happy." I looked at her, at the delusion that protected her like a force field. "Yes," I said. "You do deserve exactly what is coming to you." I left the suite and walked out to the ceremony site. The guests were starting to arrive. I saw the Sterlings taking their seats in the front row. Lawrence Sterling was wearing a tuxedo that fit perfectly. He wasn't smiling. He was watching the Banks family with the eyes of a hawk watching a field mouse. He knew. I could tell he knew. But he was letting it play out. He wanted to see how far they would go. I took my seat in the third row on the bride's side. I sat alone. People gave me a wide berth. I was the dark omen in the sea of pastels. The music started. The air was thick with perfume and humidity, and the impending crash of a life built on lies. The procession began. The bridesmaids walked down the aisle in their pink dresses, smiling plastic smiles. Then the music swelled. The doors opened. Desmond walked Tiana down the aisle. He looked proud. She looked triumphant. They walked past me, and for a second Tiana looked me in the eye. She smirked. She thought she had won. She thought because she was in the dress walking toward the altar she was safe. She thought the ring on her finger was a shield. She walked past the Sterlings. She walked past the creditors disguised as florists. She walked right into the trap. I sat back and folded my hands. The show was about to begin. The ceremony was a blur of scripture and lies. Pastor Jenkins, who had apparently been paid enough or cajoled enough to return after the power outage incident, preached about honesty and the foundation of marriage. It was ironic enough to choke on. Brad looked pale. He was sweating. He looked at Tiana with a mixture of love and terror. He held her hands tightly as if he was afraid she might disappear, or perhaps as if he was afraid of what he had gotten himself into. Desmond and Viola sat in the front row holding hands. Viola was crying, dabbing her eyes with a lace handkerchief. They looked like the perfect parents giving away their perfect daughter. They had no idea that the process server was currently parking his car in the loading zone. I watched them. I watched their backs. I watched the way they leaned into each other, supporting the weight of their deception. They were so sure they had pulled it off. They were so sure that once the vows were said, the social contract would protect them. You don't arrest the father of the bride at the wedding. That was the rule. But I wasn't playing by their rules anymore. The pastor reached the critical part of the ceremony. If there is anyone here who has just cause why these two should not be joined in holy matrimony, speak now or forever hold your peace. The silence that followed was heavy. I saw Lawrence Sterling shift in his seat. I saw Desmond stiffen his shoulders, bracing for a shout. I saw Tiana's eyes dart toward me. I didn't move. I didn't speak. I just sat there in my black dress, perfectly still. I wasn't going to object to the marriage. The marriage was the lock on the cage. Once they were married, Tiana was Brad's problem. But more importantly, once they were married, she had legally tied herself to the prenup she signed. She had certified her assets. She had sworn she entered the union with clean hands. Let her marry him. Let her seal her fate. The pastor smiled, relieved. Very well. Do you, Brad, take Tiana? I tuned out the vows. They were just words. Contracts were what mattered. And the contract I held, the mortgage note, the foreclosure, filing the civil suit for fraud that was stronger than any vow. I do, Tiana said, her voice ringing out clear and victorious. I do, Brad whispered. By the power vested in me, I now pronounce you husband and wife. You may kiss the bride. The crowd cheered. Tiana threw her arms around Brad, kissing him deeply. Desmond pumped his fist in the air. Viola clapped, sobbing openly now. It was the moment of peak triumph, the summit of their mountain of lies. And that was when I stood up. I didn't clap. I turned to the back of the venue and nodded. The double doors at the entrance of the garden swung open with a bang that silenced the applause. Arthur walked in first, carrying a thick leather briefcase. He looked grim, determined. Flanking him were 4 uniformed sheriff's deputies, their hands resting on their belts, their badges gleaming in the sun. Behind them were 2 men in plain clothes, the movers I had hired on retainer. The music died, a discordant scratch from the cello. The cheer stuck in the collective throat of 300 guests. Tiana broke the kiss. She looked at the door. She looked at me. Her face went from joy to confusion to absolute horror. Desmond stood up, stepping into the aisle. What is this? He demanded, his voice cracking. This is a private event. You can't be in here. Arthur kept walking until he reached the front row. He didn't look at Desmond. He looked at me. I nodded again. Desmond Banks. Arthur said, his voice projecting to the back of the garden without a microphone. Viola Banks. Viola clutched her chest. What is happening? Who are you? I am the attorney representing ZB Holdings, LLC. Arthur stated calmly, pulling a sheaf of papers from his briefcase. We are here to execute a writ of possession and an immediate foreclosure eviction for the property located at 1244 Cascade Heights. Foreclosure. Desmond laughed, a hysterical sound. That is impossible. This is a wedding. We are at a wedding. And we are also here. Arthur continued, his voice hardening, to serve warrants for the arrest of Desmond Banks and Viola Banks for forgery in the first-degree fraud and grand larceny regarding the illegal sale of the property at the Atlantic condominiums. The words hit the crowd like a physical wave. Gasps erupted. Lawrence Sterling stood up slowly, his face like stone. Arrest! Viola screamed. You can't arrest us. We are the parents of the bride. One of the deputies stepped forward, pulling a pair of handcuffs from his belt. Ma'am, I have a warrant signed by a judge. You need to come with us. No! Tiana shrieked, running down the altar steps, her train dragging in the grass. No. You are ruining it. Stop it, Zora. Make them stop. I stepped out of my row and walked into the aisle. I stood between my family and the police. I looked at Tiana, her face streaked with mascara. I looked at my parents cowering before the law. I can't stop it, Tiana, I said, my voice calm, carrying through the silent garden. I can't stop the law. You spent the money. You signed the fake papers. You lived the lie. I turned to the guests, addressing them directly. My parents sold my home to pay for this party, I said, gesturing to the flowers and the silk. They stole $300,000 from their own daughter to impress you. They forged my signature. They evicted me. And they did it all so they could pretend to be rich for one more day. I looked at Lawrence Sterling. You wanted due diligence, Mr. Sterling. Here it is. The house is foreclosed. The money is stolen. And the bride. I looked at Tiana, who was now clinging to Brad's arm while he tried to pull away. The bride is bankrupt. Desmond lunged at me. You ungrateful witch, I will kill you! The deputies moved fast. Before he could reach me, he was face down in the grass, his hands wrenched behind his back. The click of the handcuffs was the loudest sound in the world. Viola began to scream a high, thin wail as the second deputy secured her wrists. Brad looked at Tiana. He looked at her like she was a stranger, like she was a disease. He pulled his arm from her grip. You knew, he whispered. You knew they stole it. Tiana sobbed, reaching for him. Brad, baby, please. It was for us. It was for the wedding. Brad took a step back. He looked at his father. Lawrence Sterling gave a single sharp nod. It is over, Brad said. He took off the gold band Tiana had just placed on his finger. He dropped it into the grass. I am done. He turned and walked away. The Sterlings followed him, a phalanx of wealth and power, retreating from the contamination. I watched as the deputies hauled my parents to their feet. They were dragged past the guests, past the flowers, past the altar. Desmond was shouting obscenities. Viola was begging Jesus for help. Tiana stood alone at the altar. The groom was gone. The parents were arrested. The audience was filming. She looked at me. Her eyes were holes in her face. Why, she whispered, why did you do this? I smoothed my black dress. Because you didn't leave me a seat at the table, Tiana, I said, so I bought the table. I turned to Arthur. Handle the cleanup. I walked down the aisle, my head high. I didn't run. I didn't hide. I walked past the shocked faces of the people who had judged me for years. I walked past the ruin of my family's legacy. I walked out of the garden and into the parking lot. The sun was shining. The air was hot. But I felt cool. I got into my rental car and drove away. I didn't know where I was going next. But I knew one thing. The debt was paid. And the account was closed. The silence that descended on the garden was heavy and absolute, like the air before a tornado touches down. Arthur Brooks did not shout. He did not need to. He stood in the center of the aisle, his expensive leather shoes sinking slightly into the pristine white runner, and opened the leather folio with the precision of a surgeon preparing to cut. I watched from my seat in the third row. My hands were folded calmly in my lap, against the black silk of my dress. My heart was beating a steady rhythm against my ribs. It was not fear. It was not regret. It was the cold, hard satisfaction of a ledger finally balancing out. Arthur adjusted his glasses and looked directly at Desmond Banks. Desmond Banks and Viola Banks. He began, his voice carrying effortlessly to the back of the 300 guests. I am serving you with an arrest warrant issued by the Superior Court of Fulton County. You are charged with forgery in the first-degree identity fraud and theft by conversion regarding the illegal sale of the property at the Atlantic condominiums. A collective gasp ripped through the audience. It sounded like all the oxygen leaving the room at once. I saw the choir members in the back cover their mouths. I saw the deacons from my father's church exchange horrified glances. Desmond's face turned a color I had never seen before, a sickly grayish purple. He tried to laugh, but it came out as a wet cough. "This is a mistake," he stammered, wiping sweat from his forehead with a trembling hand. "This is a misunderstanding. My daughter gave me that property. It was a gift. Tell them, Zora. Tell them you gave it to us." I said nothing. I just looked at him, my face a mask of stone. Arthur ignored him and turned the page of the document. "Furthermore, I am executing a writ of possession for the property located at 1244 Cascade Heights. ZB Holdings LLC. The holder of the mortgage note has exercised its right to accelerate the loan due to non-payment and breach of contract. You are hereby evicted effective immediately. The locks will be changed within the hour." The crowd erupted. This was the killing blow. The arrest was a scandal, but the foreclosure was a social death sentence. In this community, owning your home was everything. Losing it publicly at your daughter's wedding was a humiliation that would echo for generations. Viola let out a sound that was half scream and half sob. She grabbed the front of her dress as if she couldn't breathe. "Evicted. But we live there. That is our home. You can't take our home." "It isn't your home," Arthur said coldly. "It belongs to the bank. And the bank is standing right there." He pointed at me. Every head turned. 300 pairs of eyes focused on the woman in the black dress. The realization hit them like a physical wave. ZB Holdings, Zora Banks. I wasn't just the victim, I was the executioner. Tiana, who had been frozen at the altar, suddenly animated. Her eyes rolled back in her head, her knees buckled, and she collapsed into a heap of tulle and lace. It was a theatrical feint, a desperate attempt to regain control of the narrative, to become the victim again. But nobody moved to help her. They were too busy watching the police. Desmond looked at the deputies approaching him. He looked at the handcuffs on their belts. The reality of his situation finally pierced his delusion. He wasn't going to talk his way out of this. He wasn't going to charm the judge. He was going to jail. "No," he shouted. "No, I am a deacon. I am a father of the bride. You cannot touch me." He turned and tried to run. It was a pathetic attempt. He scrambled toward the side exit of the garden, knocking over a pedestal of flowers. The vase shattered loud as a gunshot. The deputies were faster. They tackled him before he made it 5 steps. My father, face pressed into the grass, his tuxedo stained with dirt and chlorophyll, howled as they wrenched his arms behind his back. The click of the handcuffs was sharp and final. Viola lunged toward me, her face contorted into a mask of pure hatred. "You devil," she screamed. "You ungrateful, hateful devil, you did this, you ruined us, you destroyed this family." She tried to reach me, her manicured claws aiming for my face, but the second deputy intercepted her. He grabbed her wrists, spinning her around. "Ma'am, you are under arrest for conspiracy to commit fraud. You have the right to remain silent." "I suggest you use it," Arthur added dryly. I watched as my parents were hauled to their feet. They looked small. They looked cheap. The facade of wealth and piety they had spent decades constructing had dissolved, leaving only 2 grifters in expensive clothes they couldn't afford. Viola was weeping now, loud, ugly sobs that smeared her mascara down her cheeks. "How could you, Zora?" she wailed as they dragged her past me. "We gave you life, and you stole my livelihood, I thought. But I didn't say it. I didn't need to. The handcuffs said it for me." Tiana was stirring on the ground, realizing that her faint hadn't stopped the proceedings. She sat up, looking around wildly. Her parents were being led away. Her groom was standing 10 feet away, looking at her like she was a stranger. "Brad," she whimpered, reaching out a hand. "Brad, help me. They are crazy. My sister is crazy." I stood up then. The movement was slow, deliberate. The rustle of my black silk gown was the only sound in the garden. I walked past the frozen guests, past the shocked Sterlings, past my weeping sister. I walked up the steps to the altar where the microphone stood waiting. I picked it up. It was heavy in my hand. I turned to face the crowd. I found the videographer, who was still filming, his red recording light blinking like a heartbeat. I looked directly into the lens. I wanted this on the record. I took a breath. The air smelled of crushed flowers and expensive perfume and justice. I know you are all confused, I said, my voice amplified and steady. I know this looks cruel, but you need to understand something. Everything you see here today is a lie. I gestured to the lavish floral arrangements, the crystal chandeliers hanging from the gazebo, the white carpet. This wedding cost $120,000. My parents told everyone they were paying for it. They told you they were generous. They told you they were investing in Tiana's happiness. I paused, letting the words sink in. But they didn't have the money. They haven't had money in years. They have been living on credit and lies. So to pay for this day, to pay for the champagne you are drinking and the shrimp you are eating, they sold my home. A murmur ran through the crowd. I saw people looking at their drinks with sudden revulsion. They forged my signature, I continued, my voice hardening. They evicted me while I was out of the country. They threw my belongings in a dumpster. They left me homeless so they could throw a party. I looked down at Tiana, who was still sitting on the ground, her dress stained with grass, her face a portrait of ruin. That dress Tiana is wearing, I said, pointing a finger at her. That $12,000 Vera Wang. It was bought with the equity from my apartment. The deposit on this venue was paid with my emergency savings. The honeymoon suite was booked with money I saved for my retirement. I looked up at the crowd again, meeting the eyes of my aunts and uncles who had judged me for being single, who had called me stingy. I didn't just come here to ruin a wedding, I said. I came here to repossess my property. Because I am the one who paid for it. Every single flower, every single chair, every single note of music. It is all mine. And since I wasn't invited, I decided to come and collect what is owed to me. I turned to the Sterlings. Lawrence Sterling was standing now, his face pale, his lips a thin line. He looked at me, and I saw a flash of respect in his eyes. He understood. He was a businessman. He knew what happened when you tried to cheat the house. Mr. Sterling, I said directly to him, I warned you, I told you to do your due diligence. Lawrence nodded slowly. He stepped out of the row and walked over to his son. Brad was standing like a statue staring at Tiana. He looked young and broken. He looked like a man who had just woken up from a dream to find the house on fire. Brad, Lawrence said, his voice low but carrying in the silence. It is time to go. Brad looked at his father. Then he looked down at Tiana. Brad, please, Tiana begged, scrambling to her knees. I didn't know. I swear I didn't know they stole it. I just wanted us to be happy. You knew, Brad said, his voice cracking. You knew your parents were broke, Tiana. You knew Zora paid for everything. And when she cut you off, you didn't ask why. You just took the money. You spent $3,000 on shoes while your sister was homeless. But I love you, Tiana cried, reaching for his pant leg. I don't even know who you are, Brad whispered. He reached for his left hand. He pulled off the platinum band Tiana had placed there 10 minutes ago. It slid off easily. He looked at it for a second, a circle of gold that represented a promise based on fraud. Then he dropped it. It hit the stone path with a small metallic ping that sounded like a bell tolling. I am done, Brad said. He turned his back on her. He walked over to his father. The Sterling family closed ranks around him, a phalanx of old money and protective fury. They began to move toward the exit, a solid wall of black tuxedos and silk dresses retreating from the contagion of the bank's family failure. Tiana let out a scream that wasn't human. It was the sound of a dream dying. She collapsed onto the grass, weeping, tearing at her veil. I watched them go. I watched my parents being loaded into the back of a squad car, their heads bowed in shame. I watched the guests begin to scatter, grabbing their purses and whispering furiously, fleeing the scene of the crime. I stood alone on the altar. The sun was still shining, the birds were still singing, but the world had changed. I looked at Arthur, who was standing by the entrance holding his briefcase. He gave me a small nod. It was over. I walked down the steps. I walked past my sister, who was sobbing, into the grass. I didn't stop. I didn't offer a hand. I had offered my hand for 30 years, and they had bitten it every time. I walked down the aisle, my black dress flowing behind me like a shadow. I walked out of the garden and into the parking lot. The heat hit me, but I didn't mind. I felt cold. I felt clean. I got into my rental car and turned the key. The engine purred to life. I checked my mirror. The wedding was a ruin. The family was destroyed. The debt was paid. I put the car in drive and pulled away. I didn't know where I was going next, but for the first time in my life, I knew exactly who I was. I was Zora Banks, and I was finally free. The garden descended into madness the moment the Sterlings disappeared from view like a dam breaking under the weight of too much water. It started with a shout from the catering tent. The head caterer, the man my father had handed a personal check to just an hour before, stormed onto the lawn, his face a mask of panicked fury. He had put two and two together. He realized that a man being dragged away in handcuffs for fraud had almost certainly written him a piece of paper that was worth less than the napkin it was printed on. "Stop serving!" he bellowed at his staff who were circulating with trays of filet mignon and lobster tails. "Stop everything. Pack it up. We are leaving." The waiters looked confused for a second, freezing with trays held high, but the urgency in his voice mobilized them. They began snatching plates from the tables, not caring if guests were mid-bite. They dumped expensive food into garbage bags with a violence that spoke of financial terror. They knew they weren't getting paid, and they weren't going to leave a single crumb of charity behind. The florist was next. She watched the caterer, and then looked at the empty altar where the groom used to be. She signaled her team. "Boys, grab the centerpieces. Grab the arch. If it is not glued down, it goes in the truck." I stood by the exit watching the dismantling of the fantasy. It was brutal and efficient. The crystal candelabras were stripped from the tables. The silk runners were ripped off, leaving the bare folding tables exposed like skeletons. The string quartet packed their instruments in record time, fleeing the scene before anyone could ask for a refund. In the middle of this swirling hurricane of repossession sat Tiana. She was still on the grass where she had collapsed. Her $12,000 dress was stained with mud and grass juice, a ruin of white lace. She looked around wild-eyed as her dream was literally disassembled around her. "Hey!" she screamed as a florist grabbed a pedestal of white roses. "Stop that! Those are mine! It is my wedding day!" The florist didn't even look at her. "The check bounced, sweetheart," he muttered, hauling the flowers away. "Or it is going to. I am not taking the risk." Tiana scrambled to her feet, stumbling on her heels. She ran toward the caterer, grabbing his arm. "You can't leave. We have guests. We have a reception. My parents will pay you. Your parents are in the back of a police car." "Lady," the caterer snapped, shaking her off. "And unless you have $40,000 in cash in that bodice, I suggest you get out of my way." Tiana looked around for help. She looked for her bridesmaids, but they were gone. Keisha and the others had vanished, slipping away the moment the handcuffs came out, not wanting to be associated with the scandal. The guests were fleeing in droves, rushing to their cars to avoid being asked for witness statements, or worse, asked to pay the bill. She was completely alone. The golden child, the princess, the girl who had never heard the word no in her life, was standing in the wreckage of her own entitlement. She looked at me then, standing by the gate in my black dress. "Zora," she sobbed, her voice cracking. "Please, fix this. You always fix it. You have money. Just pay them. Please, I will do anything." I looked at her. I looked at the sister who had laughed while I stood in the rain. I looked at the woman who had stolen my home to buy a dress. I felt nothing. No pity. No anger. Just a vast, empty silence where my love used to be. "I can't fix this, Tiana," I said, my voice carrying over the sound of crashing china. "You broke it. You bought it. Or rather, you stole it. And now the bill is due." I turned my back on her wails. I walked out of the garden and into the parking lot. The sun was hot on my skin, but I felt cool. I walked to my rental car, my heels clicking a steady rhythm on the asphalt. I didn't look back at the venue. I didn't look back at the police lights flashing in the distance. I got into the car, checked my mirrors, and drove away. I left them in the ruins they had built. I left them to the creditors and the silence. 3 months is a long time in the real world, but in the legal system, it is just the beginning of the nightmare. For Desmond and Viola Banks, however, it was an eternity spent in the harsh reality of the Fulton County Jail. They had been denied bail deemed a flight risk due to the sheer scale of the fraud and the money that was still unaccounted for. Their assets were frozen. The house in Cascade Heights was boarded up, a foreclosure sign planted in the perfectly manicured lawn like a tombstone. The Mercedes was repossessed. The club memberships were revoked. The reputation they had valued more than their own children was shredded. The church had formally removed Desmond as a deacon, citing moral turpitude. The gossip in the pews was vicious and relentless. They weren't just criminals, they were pariahs. Tiana had learned the hardest lesson of all. Without my credit score and our parents' lies, she was nothing but a 26-year-old woman with no degree, no skills, and a mountain of debt. The court had assigned the fraudulent credit card charges to her personally after I provided the proof that she was the one signing the receipts. She was working now. Not as an influencer, not as a socialite. She was working double shifts at a diner in Decatur wearing a polyester uniform that smelled of grease and regret. She was living in a studio apartment with 2 roommates, taking the bus because her car had been repossessed the week after the wedding. I heard from a mutual acquaintance that she cried every time she had to clear a table, but she did it. She had no choice. The Sterling family had blacklisted her from every office job in the city. As for me, I was sitting on the balcony of my new apartment. It wasn't a condo. It was a penthouse in Midtown with a view that stretched all the way to Buckhead. I had bought it with the proceeds from the sale of my parents' house. Since I owned the mortgage note when the foreclosure went through, I recouped my initial investment plus the equity. It was a nice return. I sipped a glass of vintage red wine, the wind playing with the silk curtains of my living room. My phone buzzed on the table. It was a text message from a blocked number, but the preview showed up on the screen. It was from Viola. She must have used her one allotted phone call time to borrow a cell phone from a sympathetic guard or lawyer. Zora, please, baby. It is cold in here. Dad is sick. We are sorry. We learned our lesson. Please drop the charges. We need you. We are family. I looked at the words. I looked at the plea for mercy from the woman who had told me not to ruin her mood while I was homeless. I thought about the rain. I thought about the sledgehammer in my wall. I thought about the years of being the second choice, the bank account, the doormat. I didn't feel a pang of guilt. I didn't feel an urge to save them. I felt the peace of a balanced ledger. I picked up the phone. I didn't reply. I opened the settings menu. I found the number, and I pressed block. I set the phone down and looked out at the city lights. They say blood is thicker than water. They say family is everything. But they are wrong. Respect is everything. Loyalty is everything. And when those bonds are broken, blood is just a stain that is hard to get out. I took a sip of wine. The debt was paid. The accounts were closed. And for the first time in my life, I was exactly where I belonged. Not in the background, not in the shadows, but standing in the light of my own making, debt-free, and finally completely free. This story serves as a powerful reminder that shared DNA does not grant anyone the license to exploit or betray you. Family should be a sanctuary, not a source of financial and emotional abuse. Zora's journey teaches us that setting firm boundaries is not an act of cruelty, but a necessary act of self-preservation. When the people who are supposed to protect you become your predators, walking away is the ultimate form of strength. True peace is found only when we stop seeking validation from those committed to using us and start valuing our own dignity above toxic loyalty. If you have ever had to choose your own peace over pleasing a toxic family member, hit that like button and share your story in the comments below.